Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Van Ostren, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Around the World in 60 Minutes Without Leaving Your Library, an exploration of historical collections for today's researcher, sponsored by ProQuest and featuring Sarah Palmer, Training and Consulting Partner for ProQuest, and Daniel Lewis, a product manager on ProQuest History Vault. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. For users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will see a Q&A panel that you can use to submit questions or comments. We will spend some time responding to your questions during the program, so please feel free to submit these throughout. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to access the archived version. Now for some background on our speakers today. Sarah Palmer supports the ProQuest Congressional Statistical and Historical Databases. She frequently meets with library customers to demonstrate how ProQuest database content can be used across disciplines and also assists libraries in coming up with engaging ways to market their resources. Sarah lives in Chicago and is a Bears and Cubs fan and often finds ways to work football and baseball into her search examples. She had the opportunity to present at ACRL 2013 at a ProQuest lunch and looks forward to this webinar to meet even more ACRL members, at least over the internet. We will also be joined today by Daniel Lewis. Daniel has been working on History Vault since it launched in 2011 as part of the team that designed the product, and he has been working with the content in History Vault since 1999. When not looking at history documents or reading history books, he can often be found with a camera or a tennis racket in hand. Now I'd like to turn things over to Sarah.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you everyone for joining us today on this webinar. We have a lot to go over. It's going to be very exciting. So as we said, you can sit back and we're going to travel the world in 60 minutes. I'm talking to you from Chicago, and Daniel is in our Bethesda office. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and we will either address those during the webinar or at the end of the webinar. So as was mentioned, I'm a training and consulting partner for ProQuest. I do training for the libraries in our central region. And when we were talking about this webinar, what we want to do today, we're not going to talk about clicking or Boolean operators so much as we really want to highlight the historical content that is available from ProQuest. And when we were thinking about how we could organize this content, we didn't want to alienate anyone. We didn't want to say, oh, we're going to base this on the Civil War or World War I or the Great Migration, and have some of you say, well, that's not of interest to me. So we thought, how about the world? We have content that touches very many places around the world, and wouldn't it be fun to take a trip? And I always liked in the Indiana Jones movies where you had his travels through the map. So that's what we're going to do today. So I stole a little bit of that. So this is not so much about functionality, although we will mention that a little bit, as much as it is about the content that is available from ProQuest in a variety of our databases. So before we get started on our trip, I just want to mention something. ProQuest is a very large company, and some of you at your library may have what we refer to internally as the ProQuest platform. So, and that's actually not the platform that the products that I do most of my training are on, but the ProQuest platform is the one that most libraries have. And as we go through the webinar today, I will let you know the content that I'm talking about if it's on this platform. So if you work with our historic newspapers or ABI Inform, that would be something that would be on this platform. So I'm going to show you a couple of different screenshots Again, if you have something at your library and you kind of want to test it out, or you are interested on where it might be added if you decided to add some new products. So let's kick this off. Let's go ahead and start in the north. We're going to start in Canada today. I thought that would just be an easy way to flow through this graphic. And so Canada, the first thing that we're going to start out with is our Art and Architecture Archive. And just housekeeping for the webinar today, what I have done is the title of all of the slides is the name of the database. So the Art and Architecture Archive is available from ProQuest, and it would reside in the ProQuest platform. So this would be one of the databases that you would access through the ProQuest platform. What I like about the searching in art and architecture is I hear a lot of times from students that they really want images. And so this is something, a lot of them have access to a lot of HTML, full text databases, but oftentimes they want pictures, they want visuals. And so within this database, I was actually able to search Canada and facet to Quebec City, and then I could even get more specific and say that I just wanted the exterior of buildings. I could have also said interior of buildings. This database also allows users to look for works of art, look for tapestries, you could look for rugs, you could look for sculptures. It really allows the user to get very specific within the search. So we're going to leave our neighbor to the north, and we're going to move into our History Vault product. And as we mentioned, Daniel Lewis, who's on the call with me today, is one of our product managers for History Vault. And this is a primary source database that was originally the UPA collection. So if you're saying, some of this content looks familiar, I think we might have this in Fiche at my library. You very may well have some of it in Fiche. This is now a product that we have digitized. We have 21 modules that cover a wide variety of topics, and we're going to examine some of those. But this, as I mentioned, is a primary source database. And I know that at libraries right now, there is a big need to have primary sources available for their students. In fact, I was just at a library that said their students actually get assignments that say you need to use at least 5, 7, et cetera, primary sources. And they were saying that their students often just go to the newspaper collection. And wouldn't it be great if they had this archival collection available? And with History Vault, again, as we're going through the slides, libraries can purchase these modules as they fit their research needs. So you can really personalize the product. And History Vault, we collect the content from a variety of different sources. So you could come visit me in Chicago, and we have information from the Chicago History Museum, from the Carter Library, the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolence, Library of Congress, Smith College, the National Archives, many additional presidential libraries. We've actually had researchers come up to us and say, oh, I was just working with the Oliver Wendell Holmes content at that archive. And we say, oh, well, we have it digitized. You could have just stayed at your desk and worked with this archival material as well. So you don't have to get on a plane to work with History Vault. But we're going to start in Los Angeles with History Vault. And the reason that we're going to start in Los Angeles, I was just out at the University of Southern California, and I was showing them History Vault. And their challenge to me was, make it personal to our area. And so I started thinking about that. And that's something you can challenge your ProQuest trainer to do. Make it personal to my area. So from History Vault, we have a module called Black Freedom Struggle in the 20th Century. And it contains federal government records. On the left-hand side, I found, when I searched LA riots, I found a folder that had this correspondence from George Bush to Francois Mitterrand, telling him that he really appreciated the generous comments about the handling of this difficult situation. And I thought, well, why is George Bush concerned about what Mitterrand said, or why is he saying thank you to him? And if you look on the right-hand side, in that exact folder, and those of you who've worked with archival materials know a lot of the excitement with working with these primary source documents is what's contained together in the folder. So on the right-hand side, there is a press coverage of Mitterrand talking about Bush's handling of the LA riot situation. So it was really nice to see those two pieces together in the collection. And then Brent, I didn't write down the gentleman's last name. I think it was Scogrove, was the advisor that George Bush has made that notation there. If you agree, please have this cable sent. Now, with Daniel, I know that one of his frustrations, Scrowcroft, thank you. See, it takes a village sometimes with the with the webinars. I know that Daniel would love to name our History Vault modules all of the collections that are contained in the module, but we can't do that. It's got to, it's got to fit somewhere. But just to give you an idea of what else is contained in this Black freedom struggle in the 20th century, we also have FBI files, and so the FBI files are wiretaps on Martin Luther King and other members of the civil rights struggle. And through these FBI wiretaps, we find that Martin Luther King struggled if he should support the Vietnam War because he didn't want to dilute his message. Also in this module, we have information on the East St. Louis riots. We have civil rights information from the Carter Library, the Johnson Library, the Bush Library, and also information on the Great Migration. So I don't want you to think, oh, this just contains government records. No, there's a lot more within this module as well. So let's move up the coast a little bit to San Francisco, because I wanted to highlight one of the newer modules that we just introduced for History Vault, and that is the World War II U.S. documents on planning, operations, intelligence, excess war crimes, and refugees. Now, within History Vault, you can search within a collection. So you'll notice on the slide that within that module, there's a collection called Evacuation of the Japanese from the West Coast, Final Report and Papers of the Adjutant General's Office. I can search within that collection for San Francisco, and what I found was this newsletter called The Pacemaker, and it was published for the people who were interned at the Santa Anita Assembly. And if you look at that on the right-hand side where it talks about how the people are being fed and what they eat, I find that sort of derogatory and a little disturbing. But I had a gentleman come up to me who worked at a library whose father actually was living in that area of the country when this was happening. And, they still had needs for food delivery. They had needs for morticians. This librarian's father was a mortician and was just very disturbed by how these events were not getting out. So you can search within the collection. You can retrieve the documents in the collection. And for all of us librarians who love to share the information that we find, we include durable URLs to the folder. So you don't have to worry about, wow, I just did all this primary source archival work. How do I get back to that? How do I share that with my class? How do I share that with my professors? We include durable URLs to the folder level. So we're moving along to Texas. And if you've ever seen any of our History Vault presentations before, you'll know this next letter is one of our favorites that we highlight. And this is included in our NAACP major campaigns, education, voting, housing, employment, and armed forces. And this collection has a letter that was written by an anonymous person to the NAACP legal department talking about how Jackie Robinson had been discriminated against at Fort Hood and that the NCAA should get involved and do something about this. And I'm just going to make the question panel a little bit larger so I can see the full questions here. I just want to make sure that we'll have this open to address those for everyone. Oh, and somebody said, does the internment information include the information from Alaska? Yeah, because of the Alouettes that were interned during that time. You know, I would have to defer to Daniel on that, so let's table that question and we can get back to you. So, yeah, thank you. And yes, I got a comment, Santa Anita is not, does it contain anything from the Bay Area? Yes, definitely. There's definitely specific flyers that were posted in San Francisco, and then talking about the people being moved to the internment center. So yes, that is in there. So back to Texas, we'll stay here, and what I find interesting about this folder, again, is that not only was this anonymous person writing to the NAACP because they wanted to have somebody who could give Jackie Robinson a fair shake, we have another NAACP collection from years on where Jackie Robinson is actually taking the NAACP to task because he doesn't feel that they have progressed far enough in the issues of the day. So, and in this folder, there is a letter from Robinson to the NCAA as well, asking for some help. And this is a few years before he desegregates baseball. So just an amazing thing to find in this collection, and just a nice highlight of sort of how things move along through time. And Daniel, I don't know if you heard that. I wasn't sure. We had a question about the Alaska Alouette in that internment, so maybe we can just make sure we remember to answer that at the end. Or if you jump in now. We're free-flowing on our trip across the United States.
Look,
So
yeah,
we're gonna,
it looks.
go
It
ahead,
looks like
Daniel.
there's a small amount of information on Alaska, specifically about the Japanese internment. But then there's other files more broadly in some of the other modules as well about Alaska.
Yeah, and Daniel brings up a good point that we should mention about History Vault. You can actually search across all of the content. You don't have to just look at specific modules like I'm doing now. And so Daniel and I actually had an opportunity to present at a library, and we did have a question about Japanese internment. We just did a general search across the entire History Vault product, and we found information not only in that module that I showed you, but also in NAACP files, because they were monitoring that as a human rights violation. So very interesting, and thank you for those questions. So moving along to Georgia, I wanted to make sure that we highlighted a collection that we have called Slavery and the Law. This is a 19th century handwritten collection. And this was put together by Lawrence Schwinninger. And what his researchers did is they visited courthouses in the South and gathered court cases. Then what they did is they put together petition analysis records. So that is what is on the left-hand side. And that's what allows us to search, because on the right-hand side, the handwritten document is not OCR'd. Some of you on this call who may be genealogist researchers may say, you know what, Sarah, I have absolutely no problem whatsoever reading that handwriting. I myself cannot read it, and if you notice, I searched Palmer, which is my last name, and limited to Slavery and the Law. So this gives you an indication of the types of cases that were being brought to these courthouses. There's also quite a bit from this period about divorce. So you're seeing some women's issues where women are asking for divorce because their husband is spending all their money or not managing their dowry correctly. And so to be able to work with this information, we've had a lot of libraries who have purchased this for law schools, or then also looking at this as for history classes. Now, I couldn't leave the United States without featuring one of my favorite people in History Vault. And I hope today that maybe some of you are able to step away with some research ideas for some of your, maybe your faculty or students. But we have another complementary collection, Black Freedom Struggle in the 20th Century. But now, instead of the federal papers, we're looking at organizational records and personal papers, part 1. And within History Vault, we do have suggested searches. We also include a timeline. We also include other dynamically generated suggested either events or organizations or legal cases. So your user always gets a result, okay? Because within History Vault, they're never going to get to a result that says you don't have access to this content. We're only giving you those suggested searches for the content that you have available. So Mary McLeod Bethune, if you don't know her, she just becomes, just the more that I read about her and the more that I learn about her, the more I just feel she's an amazing woman. She did so much with education. She started a normal school, which for those of you on the call who know what a normal school is, it's a teaching school. It became Bethune-Cookman College. It's in Florida. She was friends with very influential people. Here we see her with Eleanor Roosevelt. I included this because I know that the Ken Burns Roosevelt series has been very well received. McLeod Bethune was what I like to call the original Kickstarter, because she would take $1 from someone. She would take $500 from someone. She did not want to alienate anyone. She was very passionate about her fundraising and traveled quite a bit, actually to Canada and to other places in the United States to raise awareness. Oh, and it's McLeod. Okay, thank you. See, now I even know how to pronounce my favorite person's name. Within the personal papers, I also want to point out some other individuals who are featured in this collection. We have Bayard Rustin. If you're familiar with him at all, he was a practitioner of nonviolence. He was actually the person who worked with Martin Luther King to teach him the principles of nonviolence. He was also openly homosexual. And his partner was a much younger man, and I believe is still alive. I know he was doing kind of a tour of history centers and actually was in Chicago speaking. We also have Claude Barnett, who started the Associated Negro Press, and he was very influential in Hollywood. He would have people asking him who should be cast in a movie. I saw a letter written to him by an author asking him how the author should refer to African Americans. What was the correct term? Oh, the name Bayard Rustin. It's B-A-Y-A-R-D, and last name is Rustin, R-U-S-T-I-N. And again, very interesting individual. And then the other great thing about History Vault, we provide a lot of editorial information within the product. So even if you don't know who these people are, it's a nice snapshot. Again, not Wikipedia, but a nice snapshot put together by our editorial staff. All right, so let's go to Ohio, because Daniel and I were recently in Cleveland. And if you are in Cleveland or you get a chance to visit Cleveland, on the right-hand side, you will see a chandelier that is now hanging at Playhouse Square. This is put out there by GE. And the reason I want to feature this is because we just released the Thomas Edison papers, and we are so excited about this collection. We try not to play favorites, but when you get a new one, it's kind of like the new one is the new favorite. So Thomas Edison, there on the left-hand side, that's his insomnia gang. Those were some of the people who assisted him in his labs. Why do I have Cleveland and GE? Well, Edison helped found General Electric, and look, even today it's still making advancements that they can have this huge chandelier. Edison was involved in the motion picture industry. As we know, he had many inventions. Now, Daniel did let me know that Edison did have a couple inventions that didn't quite pan out, one of them being concrete furniture. And if you've ever had to move, I know that concrete furniture is probably not something we want to deal with. So maybe we'll let Edison have a couple duds there. So I've been talking to Daniel about the idea of fame and just talking to students about fame. And was Edison famous? And so Daniel's been emailing me people that Edison hung out with, and he went camping with captains of industry, and he was called on by presidents. And so Daniel said, well, you know what, Sarah, in May of 1913, Edison was voted the most useful man by readers of independent magazines. And you know, librarians, I couldn't let that go. So I thought, you know what, I work for ProQuest. I bet we've got that article. And you know what, we do. So we have another database called the American Periodicals Database. And this database covers periodicals from 1740 to 1940. And this would be a database that would be included in the ProQuest platform. And so this is talking about the most useful Americans. And Thomas Edison got he appeared on 87% of the ballots that were sent in. And if you just read some of those things that people said about him, I love this last one, and this wasn't even all of them. This was just what I could get on the bottom here. But the world would surely be a dull place if it had not been for his genius. So, and I see we have a question about the Edison papers in History Vault and the digital collection at Rutgers. So, Daniel, do you want to address that, or?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Right, so we did work with the folks at Rutgers. We've digitized the Edison papers from the work that they've done. So our collection, the collection that's on History Vault, includes about 150,000 pages that are not on the site at Rutgers, and that's basically the later years of Edison's career. I think it's from 1899 to 1919 is solely in History Vault.
And we got a question, do we have the Tesla papers?
We do not. We've tried to find them, and the latest research I've got suggests that they're somewhere in Serbia and maybe a UNESCO World Heritage Collection. So, but we're still looking into it. We're interested in finding other inventors. So.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. And like I said, that's what's always so great about having Daniel on the call as well. So yeah, like I said, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just tell you today on this call that he was called the most useful American, because I wanted you to see the other useful Americans, and I wanted you to see that we had that article as well. Because ProQuest Congressional is another database that we have that sits on its own platform. So this is what ProQuest Congressional looks like. This is one of the products that I specifically provide training for. And we just released, fairly recently, the executive branch documents. And so the executive branch documents, if you're familiar with the 1909 checklist, they are the publications that were put out by the executive branch from 1789 to 1909. We've also added more to the collection. We actually go all the way through 1932 because these work really well with our serial set digital collection, and we felt that we wanted people to have a time frame. And so I took a class here in Chicago at Newberry Library on World War I in the Western Hemisphere. And as you can probably imagine, there's a lot in the executive branch about the Panama Canal. But I was not aware, this is one reason I took the class, was that we had also looked at Nicaragua as a possible site for a canal. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the metadata that's provided in the product. I think that this report has the most amazing author's name. It's Maximilian von Sonnestern. And what he is saying, as I highlighted here, is that the United States of North America was a people avowedly never shrinking from any difficulty and at all times foremost in holding up the honor of modern progress, have long ago sent out scientific expeditions with a view to examine certain routes then believed to offer the most facilities for the construction of a ship canal. Now, We had a treaty with Nicaragua. It later became the Brian Chamorro Treaty. We know that this is sometimes a challenge with research because students see Brian Chamorro Treaty on Wikipedia. They come to Congressional. The results they get are from the 70s when Carter rescinded the treaty. Originally it was just called the Treaty with Nicaragua. I do want to point out on that metadata record, if you have ProQuest Congressional at your library, maybe you took a break from it this summer, and that doesn't hurt my feelings, we have added related news searches. So these related news searches are being pulled from your library's ProQuest newspaper subscription. And so this is just such a great synergy because we have the executive branch collection, and then we're also pointing people out to the newspaper collection. Again, this works with any of the congressional content, so hearings. I just want to briefly give you a list of other content in executive branch: westward expansion, company info. Think of companies that are over 100 years old in the United States: Wells Fargo, Merck, Coca-Cola. Fascinating to research in executive branch. Recipes that were issued during World War I to encourage people to eat less meat. Budgets, not only war budgets, but also personal budgets. Civil War information, information on the establishment of the tax system, Native American issues, regulations, war propaganda. So again, I just wanted to point out executive branch because that is a new content piece that we've added to our congressional product. All right, and we're doing okay on time here on our trip, which is great because we have to make a leap across the ocean. And we're going to go over to England and Europe. And I grouped these together because we have quite a few databases at ProQuest that feature these areas. And so I wanted to highlight these broadly and then move back into more specific examples. So Queen Victoria's Journals is a database available from ProQuest, and this, again, sits on its own platform. And the reason that this sits on its own platform is because of the way that it's searched and the way that it allows you to compare different versions of the diaries. Now, Queen Victoria was the largest serving British monarch from 1837 to 1901. This database has 141 volumes, and this content was never before available in its entirety, and you actually had to have a special appointment at the Royal Archive. So we worked with the Royal Archive to digitize this collection and bring it into the hands of researchers who can't always travel to those archives. So again, just thinking about the length of time and where she traveled and what she was responsible for. And here is a great drawing from her journal that you can see that she's keeping track of who she met on her travels, and just the observations that she makes. Again, being able to combine those with other historical text is very exciting. So we also have a database called Periodicals Archive Online, and this has 37 key subject areas. It covers a range of research, and because I knew Daniel would be on the call, I have a search in his honor in just a second. But The Spectator is just one of the titles that's available in Periodicals Archive Online. And so as we said at the beginning, Daniel likes tennis. So I'm not going to use football or baseball today, but I'm going to use tennis. And so let's say Daniel wanted to research the history of tennis. Here we have an article from 1926 from The Spectator talking about the lawn tennis age. And I just like that it's talking about there are a certain number of the old school who shake their heads at this. Tennis, for some reason, bears a bad name in certain scholastic quarters. You'll notice in the metadata on the right-hand side that we do have, again, that durable URL to this record. Periodicals Archive Online is in the ProQuest database. So again, I always, if I don't mention where something is, please catch me, but this would be one that would be in the ProQuest platform. We have early English books online, and this is a definitive online collection. So these are titles before 1700, so just some bullet points on early English books online. But we also have a companion product to that, which is called Early European Books. And what I like about learning about these products, even just being a trainer and employee at ProQuest, is if you think about the challenge of gathering this information, what used to happen when companies or research institutions would try to digitize this material, they would stick to their own country. So maybe they would say, okay, we're just going to find the books from our country. Well, ProQuest, we have no barriers. You know, geography to us, we don't care. If it's from Europe, we're going to collect it. So the way that this works is EEB, as we call them internally, and EBO, although Early English Books and Early English Books Online, work together. And so we have a subset in Early English Books Online. And as I said, there has never been a single catalog before because people really concentrated on national boundaries. We don't. So if we don't have any boundaries for this period, and we're collecting all of it. So if you do have scholars who want to work with these publications, again, they both have their own platform, and that's just based on being able to allow you to search and really use the benefits of those search tools. So we're going to move away from England and Europe, and we're going to go to South Africa. And for South Africa, we are going to look at Women's Wear Daily. So this is, again, a database that would be available through the ProQuest platform. For those of you not familiar with Women's Wear Daily, it is a publication that focuses on the business of fashion. And as we know, fashion, clothing manufacturing are huge, huge industries. And these are stories that students want to work with. Women's Wear Daily is positioned a little different in the marketplace, that because it has a quicker turnaround, it can cover fashion events around the globe. Now, I realize this is not as historical, the date range, as some of our other examples that we've looked at, but I just wanted to show this because I found this result, and then I also found another result for South Africa where there were competing fashion weeks. So it was really showing the emergence of that area of the world as a player in this industry. Again, I just want to point out the metadata on the left-hand side, really even pointing out who the designers are, so that allows the users to search to that specific level. Now, you know how when you're preparing for a webinar like this and you have a pause, you know, either in the middle of the night or when you're out running, and you say, oh, I think I made a mistake on one of the slides. My next one, I made a mistake, so I'm going to point that out, but I just want to make sure we had a question. Oh, yeah. So we got a question about what about Eastern Europe? Soon we'll be celebrating 25 years since the collapse of communism. Yes, definitely. Eastern Europe, we have a large historic newspaper collection, and so we won't take a look at the Eastern European results. But yes, the arts and architecture, I should have pointed that out. There's quite a bit about Poland, Russia. So yes, and we actually have a link at the end of this webinar that's going to allow you to trial all of the products we're talking about today. So definitely if you want to run your own searches, I think that would be awesome. And yes, communism, we're going to take a look at some China examples, but Eastern Europe definitely in there as well. So thank you for asking. So the boo-boo that I made on my next slide as we move to Morocco is that I forgot to put that this is from the Vogue archive. So I did a search for Marrakesh or Marrakesh because we have different spellings. And I just thought the juxtaposition of the black and white photography was so great. The one on the left is from 1924. Imagine that, 1924, and Vogue is talking about Marrakesh and Morocco and traveling there and what these countries are like. And on the right-hand side, since I've already been corrected on pronunciation, and sometimes my pronunciation is really bad, I'm just going to say Lupita. Is that the correct way to say her name? And Nyong'o, I'm not even going to, I just slaughtered her last name. But gorgeous actress. And here's the photo shoot from 2014 in Marrakesh. And just imagine being able to look back at how we were talking about other countries, and then how still, it still seems exotic, but look at how progressive Vogue was to be there in 1924. And we have a full digitized run of their entire archive. So, I mean, that's everything. It's ads, it's articles, it's editorials, it's fiction. I mean, it is just a phenomenal collection. And so that is also available from ProQuest, and the Vogue archive, along with the Women's Wear Daily archive, sits on the ProQuest platform. China. So we're going to move on over to China, and I know that many of you on the call perhaps have some of the ProQuest historical newspapers. We have added a Chinese newspaper collection. The Chinese newspaper collection covers 1832 to 1953. It's 12 titles. Don't get nervous. They're all in English. Now, I like pandas, and if you have not read The Lady and the Panda, I highly recommend that book. It's amazing about China and just how people were going in there and taking pandas out. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to search pandas. Let's keep this light. So you can see that we've got pictures. We're talking about the last panda to leave China. And then on the right, I thought this was awesome. Here we have Shirley Temple, one of the most famous people at the time. And here she goes to the Brookfield Zoo outside Chicago, and the panda turns its back on her. So, they didn't get along at that point. But again, being able to look at the Chinese government and looking at how they're trying to protect this resource and not have it taken out of their country. The historic newspapers also sit in the ProQuest platform. So with India, we now have the Times of India. And the Times of India, we have a run of 1838 to 2004. The reason I included this is coverage of the United States having a man land on the moon, which, we think is a humongous deal. Now, what I really like about our historic newspaper collection is that we also offer the researcher a front page view. So they're not just seeing those PDFs out of context. They're able to click on the front page. And if you look at the front page and see how it says almost all eyes. Again, how are events being covered? What did this look like in the U.S.? If you want to look at the Washington Post or the New York Times versus the Times of India versus the Chinese newspaper collection, how were these events being covered? So I think being able to see this in the format in which it was printed is very important. So now we're going to move over to Vietnam. And Vietnam, we're going to go back to History Vault. And within History Vault, we have a module called the Vietnam War and American Foreign Policy, 1960 to 1975. Part of this module contains a collection of the AP archives. This is a collection that was specifically digitized for History Vault. We worked with the archivist at the Associated Press to digitize the records of the Saigon Bureau. We owe Peter Arnett a huge debt, we as a company, we as researchers, because this man is a pack rat, and that is how these documents exist. The Associated Press told him, throw away those extra copies of the story, don't keep them. They would use mimeographs. He would keep the back page. He shipped them all back to the United States at the end of the Vietnam War. Those of us at ProQuest, we had him speak at a lunch for many of our customers at ALA. His daughter was there. She said she used to play in the garage and the trunks would almost fall on her. And so now they've been digitized. Why is this so interesting? Well, for a lot of reasons. First of all, there's a lot of Pulitzer Prize winners who wrote for the Associated Press. The other thing is the AP was the modern-day Twitter. And what do I mean by that? The Associated Press could only print so many characters a day. So Peter Arnett maybe could write a great story about what was going on in Vietnam, but maybe there was an event in another area of the world or in the United States, and his story never ran. And I just think for a researcher, it would be fascinating to pick one paper, maybe the New York Times or the Washington Post, and to be able to say, hey, did this story ever run, and kind of compare that. So just very exciting to have this collection. Now, within Vietnam and American foreign policy, there's also Nixon's trip to China. If any of you write historical fiction, I encourage you to write the story of Miss Tang, who was the interpreter who traveled with Kissinger and Nixon. I would love to know her story. So just great content, again, within this module. All right, so we're going to head on over to New Zealand, and this is actually going to be the last country that we're going to visit because I want to make sure we have time for questions. Or I also have Barbara Olson on the call, who's our marketing manager. And as we know, Daniel Lewis is on the call. And if I forgot anything, I want them to make sure that they help me mention it. But the reason that I wanted to feature New Zealand is because we also have a collection that recently came out. It's the Trench Journals and Unit magazines of the First World War. And Barb and some staff at ProQuest, we actually had an internal contest. And Barb and her staff won. And what they were able to develop was this microsite. And this microsite for the Trench Journals is fascinating. If you have the Trench Journals at your library and you want to market them, I would encourage people to check out the microsite for the Trench Journals. If you're interested in the Trench Journals, again, this is a great resource to go to explain the content. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that one. This also is content that resides in the ProQuest platform. As you can probably imagine, the Trench Journals that were published for the people serving in World War I, there's quite a bit of poetry, there's book reviews, there's health information. I wanted to feature some women for this last slide. So this is a nursing journal that's published by, it's the Journal of Nurses for New Zealand. The title, again, now I'm shying off the pronunciation because you guys have scared me, is a Maori term that means guardianship. And this journal actually was first published in 1908, and it's still around today. So to be able to have what they were writing about, I think, in World War I is just fascinating. And on the right-hand side in the editorial, what they're talking about is how the Great War is going on, and people from New Zealand have volunteered to go fight, and actually nurses have spent their own money to go help the troops. And so this is the type of content that you'll find. And with the Trench Journals, the reason that I could limit to New Zealand is because you can also limit to not only the regiment or the type of group, but you can also limit to a geography. So if you do have someone who's looking at a specific geography, they would be able to search the Trench Journals just for that geography. Now again, with the ProQuest platform, you could search across all content, and your researchers may say, it doesn't bother me where the content comes from as long as I get to it. But again, you could search by specific countries as well. So we do have a URL that is set up for everyone who's been at the webinar today, and I'm not sure if this is going to get emailed, but maybe we can talk to ACRL about including this in the follow-up email. But what this URL will do, and it is actually live if you want to click on it, it's going to take you to a specific page on the ProQuest site where you can request a trial. And the trial will include all of the products that we talked about today. So if you want to search anything, If you want to check if specific content that you're looking for is available in any of those databases, again, you would be able to trial the information. At ProQuest, we're really big on LibGuides. We have a lot of them to support many of our products, so please feel free to check out our LibGuides site. We have training webinars, which would cover more of the search here, click here, here are the results. And, oh, good. And Jen from ACRL just let me know that she can send that link in the follow-up. So perfect. Thank you, Jen. And I know Jen's going to have a little wrap-up here, too. So we'll have that trial link in the wrap-up. Definitely the LibGuides. You can check out sample content. As I mentioned, the training webinars. We do have a webinar evaluation. If you get a chance and you'd like to fill that out, let us know what you liked about this. Maybe if there was some content that you'd want us to cover in future webinars. If you have any questions about what I did today on the webinar, you can always email me directly, and I'd be more than happy to explain any of my search, how I got to that content. But again, we really appreciate everyone coming out today and learning more about all these resources. I don't know about you guys. I'm a little tired from my trip around the world, so I hope that everyone enjoyed it. No frequent flyer miles, though, but hopefully we touched on some different areas. So I'm going to open it up to questions and see if we have any questions, and also open it up to Barb and Daniel if I left anything out. All right, so we'll see. Great, and we'll just watch the question panel here really quick and see if anyone's typing furiously away. I also want to make sure that we got to all the questions. Yes, we did talk about. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in. I'll just wait in case someone says, no, I'm typing. Oh, how long does the trial last? Barb, do you know if we set that up for a specific time period?
Yeah, typically our trials run for 30 days.
So 30 days.
Yep.
Great, thank you for that question. All right, well, we wanted to take you around the world in 60 minutes. I talked really fast because I was afraid I wouldn't get through all of it. But Jen, I don't see any other questions. If you have the conclusion, and I'll just keep my eye out in case someone does type something in at the last minute.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Well, it looks like we're about ready to wrap up our time together if there's no questions. I just wanted to give a virtual round of applause to our presenters for sharing some useful information. We greatly appreciate your time and insights. And as a reminder, we have recorded today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice that will include instructions on how to access the archived version. And I can send that other link that you requested, Sarah. So,
Great.
Thanks again for everyone who participated today for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the session. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.